Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from your little break. We will continue with the next session, which will be on the postdoctoral fellowships. As a quick reminder, we have a dedicated Slido session for this, so please feel free to post your questions either during the presentation or after in this dedicated Slido. Next slide, please. So I will present to you the postdoctoral fellowships, which is the successor of the Horizon 2020 individual fellowships. Main objectives of the action are first and foremost to foster excellence through the implementation of an individual research project. We aim to enhance the creative and innovative potential of all researchers that are holding a PhD, and by doing a specific training on transferable skills and career development. We also have a heavy focus on the III mobility, as in the other MSCA actions. So international, intersectoral, and interdisciplinary mobility are an integral part of our postdoctoral fellowship scheme. What is also very important for us are bridges to and exposure to the non-academic sector. This, of course, links back to development of transferable skills. We aim for researchers to be also successful in the non-academic sector. Research areas that are allowed under postdoctoral fellowships are very broad. We accept any and all scientific fields, ranging from economics over mathematics to social sciences. What is a novelty under Horizon Europe is that we also include Euratom research areas, which would mean, for example, nuclear safety, security, radiation protection, etc. Previously, they were not eligible. They are now, and we have an indicative additional budget available for these of 1 million euros annually. Details on the Euratom part can, of course, be found in the work program of Euratom itself. Next slide, please. The activities of our action are twofold. So first and foremost, we are a mono beneficiary action. So we have one beneficiary that will support postdoctoral research and researcher. We do split it out in two types of actions. We have European postdoctoral fellowships and global postdoctoral fellowships. European postdoctoral fellowships are intended for researchers that are either moving inside of Europe or coming back to Europe for any other country in the world. Contrary to the past, we have no separate panels anymore, so all the European scheme will compete with each other. Global postdoctoral fellowships, on the other hand, are intended for researchers that wish to leave Europe for a third country for up to 2 years and then return back to Europe to bring back their knowledge to us. In addition, and slightly outside of the postdoctoral fellowships, we have what are called widening activities that will be supported through the ERA fellowships. Fully aligned with the MSCA postdoctoral fellowships call, there is no separate submission. It's an integral part of MSCA postdoctoral fellowships. And it's aiming at participation from the EU 13 countries, including Bulgaria, Romania, but also Portugal, Greece, and other associated countries with a relatively low RNI performance. So by using this scheme, we wish to boost research in those particular countries. Next slide, please. When we speak of the postdoctoral fellowships, of course, we need to clarify who can apply to these fellowships. So first of all, we have one participating organization. It's always going to be a legal entity in a member state or an associated country, with one exception that I will come back to later on in this slide. This is for the partner organization. When it comes to the researcher, so our actual target audience, we accept any nationality for the scheme, with one restriction, if you will, on the global fellowships, where we only allow member state or associated country nationals or long-term residents to participate. Long-term residence means an uninterrupted period of up to 5 years in one of the member states or an associated country. A second eligibility criterion is that all researchers need to be in possession of their PhD. This is a novelty. Before, we also used to take into account research experience. However, the rule now is that you must have your PhD awarded, and in case it is not awarded yet, we would be able to take into account the defense date, the viva date, if that were before the call deadline. A second novelty for Horizon Europe is that researchers must not have more than 8 years of research experience after their PhD. Up until the call deadline. There are exceptions, however, that can extend these 8 years, notably career breaks, maternity leave, paternity leave, work outside of research, work outside of Europe in research. So all these categories can be used to extend the 8 years and still qualify for postdoctoral fellowships. A final criterion is mobility. As you'll remember from my very first slide, mobility is a very crucial aspect of postdoctoral fellowships. And therefore, we aim that researchers, applicants, cannot have resided or have had their main activity in the country of the beneficiary, or in the case of global fellowships, in the host organization, for more than 12 months, so 1 year, in the past 3 months before, 3 years, apologies, before the call deadline. I'll come back to that one exception that I noted about participating organizations and nationality. When it comes to the proposals that could potentially qualify for Euratom, instead of using as reference base member states or Horizon Europe associated countries, we use member states or Euratom associated countries. So the criteria are a little bit more restrictive for those wishing to also be considered for the Euratom funding. Of course, that does not affect MSCA funding at all. Next slide, please. A few more features to discuss about our fellowships. European fellowships have to have a duration at minimum 12 months, maximum 24 months, standard duration. Global fellowships run between 24 and 36 months, so 2 to 3 years, out of which the first 1 to 2 years, 12 to 24 months, are considered the outgoing phase, taking place in a third country, and a mandatory 12-month return phase in Europe, an integral part of a global fellowship. Another feature that we modified slightly is about secondments. So it is possible now to go on a secondment worldwide. This was previously not possible. It is now. And you can have such a secondment to another organization for up to 1/3 of your fellowship duration. For global fellowships, it's slightly different. It's 1/3 of the outgoing phase, and no secondments would be allowed in the return phase, the mandatory 12-month return phase. A new feature for Horizon Europe, which we value very much, is the option to have an additional placement of up to 6 months after the regular duration of the action, which would take place in non-academic sector in any European organization or associated country organization. It will take place after the end of the standard duration and is aimed as being an incentive, really, to promote career moves of researchers between academia and non-academic sector, thereby expanding their career opportunities. Fully optional, but of course, additional duration means additional funding for this part. Very important information on our calls. Our first call, the 2021 call, has been opened a few days ago and will close on October 12th. The submission forms will follow shortly. We have a budget of 242 million euros this year, and as I indicated before, we have 1 million in addition for Euratom funding. In 2022, the call will open in April and will have a slightly higher budget. You also see that we have a little feature on resubmission restrictions. That means that proposals that would receive a score below 70% this year would be restricted from applying next year. However, this year, the 2021 call, there are no such restrictions. not even resulting from Horizon 2020. Next slide, please. Very important information about the budget structure of our action. As you can see here, we also, like the other MSCA actions, use unit contributions. For us, they are split in two main categories. We use contributions for recruited researchers and a second part, which is what we call institutional unit contributions, which go to the hosting organization. The first part, which is directly for the researcher, there are three main categories to consider: living allowance, mobility allowance, and family allowance. You see in the slide there are two more. However, these are not applicable at proposal submission stage and only come into play in implementation stage. So I will not go into too much detail on those right now. However, on the living allowance, you will see the basic amount is now set to 5,080 euros. On this amount, a coefficient will be applied, which depends country to country. For European fellowships, the coefficient will be set to the one of the hosting organization. For global fellowships, it will be both the one of the third country for the duration that you would spend there and the European host for the remaining 12 months. This is, of course, also a gross amount. National deductions will apply to this particular section. Second category, mobility allowance. As we value mobility so much, of course, there is an incentive on that as well. This is 600 euros per month that will be paid outright. The third category is the family allowance. This is paid to researchers that are either married or in an equivalent relation to marriage, or have dependent children. In that case, they will receive an amount of 660 euros per month. Then when we look at the institutional costs, they are split into two categories. First of all, the research training and networking contribution of 1,000 euros per month. This is intended to support the researcher if they have conferences to attend, also for cases such as publications. It's all linked to the research, but it's not part of the salary of the researcher, which the first part would be. The second category here concerns management and indirect contribution, and it's basically overheads for the hosting organization. Next slide, please. Final aspect of the postdoctoral fellowships are the award criteria. As in all the other MSCA actions, we have three main pillars to judge on. It's excellence, impact, and quality and efficiency of the implementation. Excellence will be valued at 50% of the total score, impact at 30%, and implementation at 20%. Scores will be awarded for each of the criteria as a whole, not by individual category, and they will receive a basic score out of 5, then multiplied with the weight. Proposals that score less than 70 will not be considered for funding any further. When we look at the specific criteria here under excellence, you will see, first of all, of course, the capacity of the research project for innovation and the extent of ambition and going beyond the state of the art. It's a very vital criterion. We will also look at the proposed methodology, including any interdisciplinary approaches and other aspects that could be relevant to the methodology and its value. A third part here is the quality of the supervision, the training that you will receive, and the two-way transfer of knowledge, meaning a transfer of knowledge between the researcher and the host. Both parties are, of course, expected to grow from such a fellowship. A fourth aspect is the quality and the appropriateness of the researcher's experience. Are they suited to do this particular project? Under impact, we'll see, first of all, what the impact could be of a fellowship on the career of the researcher. Second, what the impact could be overall on, let's say, an economic impact and societal impact, and of course, scientific impact. Under implementation, we of course want to take a look at the quality and effectiveness of the work plan and any associated deliverables, work packages, timing, resources. And of course, also the quality and capacity of the hosting organization and any other participating organization. I think this is the end of my presentation, so we could now proceed with questions. So I will start with the most popular question. Does the mobility rule due to the pandemic lockdown apply for the country where researcher had main activity or in the country where they physically stayed? It would be both that we would take into account. So of course, we will apply some flexibility, but it is recommended that the proposal part A and B are filled out as completely as possible, preferably with information on physical stay, but with further details in the part B of the proposal, where all these consequences of lockdown can be further explained. The second question. Without the Part B in RTF format, we cannot start working on the proposals. Are you planning to disseminate it, or we just wait for the actual call opening? Indeed, the RTF format Part B will be part of the submission session. This will come very, very soon. So we plan to have it in the next few days. And in that particular session, you will have full access to the Part B template with instructions as well. So we kindly ask for a little bit more patience. It's on its way, we promise. For the next question, are proposals expected to demonstrate exposure to the non-academic sector? As in, are you penalized if your proposal doesn't? No. You would not be penalized if your proposal doesn't demonstrate any exposure to the non-academic sector. It is highly valued, so you could receive more scoring, a more higher score if it is, but you would never be penalized for its absence. The next question, who is the employer during a placement outside academia at the end of the fellowship? The employer would, and also the final responsible, if you will, for the implementation of this additional placement would still be the original intended host organization. It's after all a placement. The contract should cover that particular placement as well. However, for legal issues such as this, about who will employ, it would be recommended to always check the annotated grant agreement that will also be made available. For the next question, there are not enough details related to non-academic recruitment at the end of the fellowship. Salary and research costs will be provided. Yes, they will indeed be provided. So if there is an optional non-academic placement that takes place after the regular duration of the project, so between 1 and 6 months, this period of 1 to 6 months will indeed be covered by the exact same budgetary structure that I showed earlier. It will also be paid at the exact same coefficient as the initial hosting organization. It is fully covered. For the next question, the difference between a secondment and a placement in the postdoctoral fellowships. Right, so let's start with a secondment. A secondment is, actually I have to clarify first that both are optional. So do not feel obliged to use either a secondment or a placement in your proposal. It's nice to have, it's not mandatory. A secondment is where you are still employed by and working at your hosting organization, but you would leave for a determined period of time to, for example, gain some knowledge in another organization or to perform part of your experiments in another organization. You will be sent out from your hosting organization to the receiving organization, do some work there, and then return to your initial organization while still being under supervision by your hosting organization. On the other hand, the non-academic placement is and actually more of an incentive to expose yourself to the non-academic sector. So it's an addition, it's a continuation of your research project, but in the non-academic sector. So I hope this clarifies a little bit. I do invite you to read this in the guide for applicants as well. We have some clarification there on the difference between those two. And if need be, we can always clarify this particular difference further in writing. For the next question. Oh, that jumped. Right, I'll take the first one that now appears. I couldn't find any exclusivity clause in the documents already published. I am in the middle of a second PhD. Am I eligible, or is dedication to MSCA exclusive? Right, so normally for postdoctoral fellowships, we do expect 100% work on the action as a rule. It is possible after the proposal were to become a grant and funding would be received, to move the implementation to part-time status. So it is combinable with other activities, but not while the PF itself is running. There would be a part-time work or a suspension to accommodate this, because we do expect 100% dedication to the action. For the next question, I see it's about Switzerland. So can I apply for a global fellowship going to Switzerland as a third country? So I'm sure you know that the status of Switzerland at the moment is under processing. So it's very difficult to give a very clear answer to this, if they will become associated or not. So this is also a question that we will keep on for later and reply in writing. The same applies to the other questions about Switzerland. It's a political decision that we will clarify afterwards. For the next question, for postdoctoral fellowships, how will it be assessed if a person has a PhD or not? We use our approach as being on self-declaration, with supporting documents being kept by the hosting organization. In the submission forms, you will be requested to declare the date on which you obtained your PhD degree. It is then for the hosting organization to keep supporting documents on file if we were to request them. And by we, I mean REA, if we were to request them for further checks or audit. So it's initially based on self-declaration, but always keep supporting documents on hand. For the next question, is teaching at a university considered as a research experience? I will also propose that we keep this question for a later answer, as it is still being clarified as well. Next question. For postdoctoral fellowships, when a non-academic secondment or placement in this case is planned, do we need a letter of commitment? So first, again, I will clarify there is a difference between the secondments and the non-academic placements. For a secondment, no letter of commitment is needed. For a non-academic placement that will take place after the regular duration of the proposal, the project, yes, a letter of commitment is needed. If the letter of commitment cannot be provided, then the proposal would not be continuing in evaluation. So it's a very crucial document to add to a proposal. If there is a non-academic placement, there has to be a letter of commitment in that case. For the next question, does the, oh, that jumped again. Right, I'll continue with what I was reading. Does the reintegration rules that do not consider years in a third country apply to European fellowships? I'm not quite sure. We do have some specific rules about reintegration when it concerns 2 years in a third country, indeed, but that comes into play for the extension on the 8 years maximum duration. So we'll take the next one. What was the success rate for postdocs in recent years, and do you think it will improve in the next calls? So in recent years, the success rate for this particular scheme, so individual fellowships now, postdoctoral fellowships, was around 14 to 15%. We are a very heavily subscribed call, and that is indeed the consequence of that. We don't expect it to change that much, but it's hard to say. Do applicants need to upload their PhD to the system? No, you are not expected to upload this at all. Just add the date and that is all. You just keep it for your own records. For the next question, is the UK seen as a member state? No, the UK is no longer a member state. However, they are to become an associated country, and they can participate on the same footing as other associated countries. How are funds distributed between disciplines, considering that there are no separate panels? So the funds will be distributed first between European and global fellowships. There are dedicated funding for both. And within each of those two, the funds will be distributed based on the weight of proposals submitted to 8 scientific domains. So we base it on an equal weight. For the next question, which regards eligibility, can you clarify what is meant by main activity? Would a fractional postdoc in the intended country conducted remotely be main activity? So it's a two-pronged issue. It's either main activity or country of main residence. So a fractional postdoc in the intended country would not necessarily be the main activity. But this is a very, very specific question for which it's recommended to contact a national contact point. They will be able to assist better with such a specific question. 8 years of research experience. Does that mean full-time experience? A researcher with 15 years of research experience with half-time position is eligible. We do mean 8 calendar years after the PhD was obtained. So any extensions would have to be encoded within the accepted criteria as defined in the work program and guide for applicants. So it is 8 years, calendar years. We don't necessarily consider half-time position or partial work on this. I think we have time for one more, two more. What is the procedure for applying the exceptions for the up to 8 years after PhD rule? I have 16 years after PhD, but only 4 of them are inside EU. So any experience outside of Europe in a third country can be encoded in the submission forms as an extension. Okay, so this is foreseen in our rules to extend for this. The next question, can one have a placement in global fellowship? So that would be 36 months plus 6 months placement at the end outside the academia. This is indeed possible. So the optional non-academic placements can be used both in global fellowships and European fellowships. And that would indeed bring the project to a long duration. So I think this is almost the last question. For postdoc fellowships, can there be supervisors from 2 countries, even if the main supervision and host institution is from 1 country only? We have in our scheme 1 main supervisor who is also named in the proposal, and they will be the formal responsible supervisor. However, it is of course possible to have a supervision team in place. So it is not abnormal, I would say, to have supervision from different countries, knowing that we will still have 1 main supervisor. So I think the remainder of the questions we could keep to answer later on, because our time for this session is up. So I would thank you all for your presence here and your questions, which were very interesting. And I would like to remind you that to go to the next session, which is on MSCA and citizens, you can go back to the program page and select the link for the next session from that particular page. Thank you very much.